friends. My name is Stephanie Romero, and I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh. I want to welcome you to our podcast, The Ripple Effect. Awaken Pittsburgh is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering well-being, empathy, and compassion for all by teaching and encouraging mindfulness and meditation practices. I also want to take a moment to let you know that Awaken Pittsburgh offers many other opportunities for practice and connection. For example, you can join our online community, which features a space to more deeply explore the topics we cover with our guests. We have weekly posts to spark thought, practice, and reflection. I hope you will come join us to explore, connect with others, and deepen your practice. You can find out more at awakenpittsburgh.org. I am so happy to have Summerlee Kelly on our Ripple Effect podcast this month. Summerlee is a graduate of Point Park University with a degree in psychology. Her passions lie in holistic healing through spiritual and psychological contemplation and growth. Summerlee has done much of her own healing through mindfulness, meditation, and studying the importance of regulating the nervous system. She studies homeopathy and has healed chronic pain in her own body through yoga and other self-care practices. So Summerlee, thank you so much for joining me on our podcast. I'm excited to get to know you a little better. I know you a little bit with the work that you've done with us at Awaken, but I'm excited to learn more about you and the role of mindfulness and nurturing, which is the topic we're going to explore together today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be talking with you today.
Great. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your relationship to mindfulness and meditation. We'd love to hear just that.
Yeah. So I guess for me, and this is also why I chose nurturing to talk about is I have spent a lot of my professional life working in childcare. And I learned one of the best pieces of advice I ever received was if you're a person that's more inclined to be in a caregiving role, you have to learn how to nurture yourself the same way that you would nurture another person. So that became like a really powerful message for me in my personal life, especially when I started dealing with some difficult stuff in my own life and dealing with some mental health stuff. Establishing, a regular routine of mindfulness meditation helped me so much, and I couldn't do it without establishing that mindset of I need to give myself that compassion that I'm prepared to, give another person. So that's kind of, yeah. So for the role of mindfulness meditation in my own life, just learning how to, regulate my nervous system, learning how to self-soothe, and holding myself to that, to that standard, I guess, of self-care every single day.
That's amazing. I love that you equate your practice to self-soothing and self-care. And I wonder, could you describe what exactly are the practices that you love the most that you think allow you to self-soothe and do that self-care?
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing is always journaling. Just, getting all of my thoughts out on paper is something that I need to do every single day. And then past that, it's time spent first doing yoga. I have an established yoga routine that I do every morning. I have my sun salutations followed by a hip opening sequence. I have struggled with polycystic ovaries and endometriosis, so having a hip opening sequence that I do every single morning has provided really significant pain relief. So that's a way that I incorporate mindfulness meditation, movement meditation. So using my body. After that, I was never able to just sit for 10 minutes prior to establishing that yoga routine in the morning. I was never the person that could meditate. So I feel like beginning with that physical element allowed me to. It's like an expansion and a contraction. So it's like the movement provides me with the opportunity to expand, and then I allow myself the opportunity to contract in silent meditation following the yoga. And then, during my meditation process, I love to utilize different crystals that I associate with the different chakra points. I do visualizations targeted specifically at certain chakra points. So I spent a lot of time, given my pain condition in my solar plexus, imagining, colors associated with that area. And I'll usually give myself about 10 minutes to do that. And that's my mindfulness practice every day. So those are my daily habits.
I love that. You are describing a very holistic, multifaceted practice that brings in so many different aspects. We often, when we're teaching, use an image that's from the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society. It's the tree of contemplative practices, and each branch represents a different way to engage with contemplative or mindfulness practices. And I feel like you've got like 4 branches.
Oh, yay! That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
And I love that so much because people sometimes, and you kind of named this and what you were saying, people sometimes have this idea like, I can't meditate, I can't
Yeah.
sit, right? And
Mhm.
what you described, there's so much wisdom there. Like, one, everybody's practice is unique and matches who they are and what they need, and that might even change day to day sometimes for us.
Absolutely.
So that's one thing I love about what you just said. And then the other thing I love about what you said is that people sometimes don't realize that yoga traditionally was to help us prepare our bodies and minds to be able to meditate. So it's so normal that you're saying, like, I need to do something with my body to settle before I'm physically able and ready to work with my mind in that still way of meditation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I love that you have found this on your own in your own wisdom, and really following what your body wanted and needed, and really honoring that, and you came to, a series of practices that I think are just lovely, and yeah, a lot of wisdom there. A really lot of wisdom there.
Thank you.
I guess you talked about this a little bit, but I want to follow up with a general idea of like holistically, what does nurturing mean?
Yeah.
And you did kind of hit on that kind of there's a difference between nurturing others and nurturing ourselves. So maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah. I guess I feel like I've been so blessed to be able to work with children because you realize that as children are, developing and learning how to understand and regulate their own emotions, you learn that you really have to hold space for big emotions. It's just so important. Um, and so when you're able to do that for a child, even for something that might seem like it's not a big deal, but the child is having this very intense emotional reaction. You have to hold space for the child's emotion even in that moment. And you realize like if I'm able to do this for a little kid, I should be able to do this for myself too. And that doesn't necessarily mean it shouldn't mean that you're consumed by the emotion, especially if it's maybe disproportionate to the situation. But you have to you have to give it the respect that it deserves, and you have to give it the time and understanding. Um, so yeah, I would say that's we're able to nurture ourselves better when we can reflect when we can like reflect the way that we nurture others in our own nurturing practices. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think what you're naming, and maybe I'm curious about if this is more true for women than men, because I think there's uh, something about socialization that's coming up for me, right? Like women are often socialized to be caring, nurturing, like we're set on the path to be moms, right? And so I think what you're saying rings true for me because we're not always taught how to do that for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I feel like our emotions are often like shamed, you know?
Yes, yes.
Um, and you can't, it's so important, for early childhood development to not do that to kids, to not shame a child's emotion. So it's like, you shouldn't shame your own emotions if you wouldn't shame theirs.
Yeah, and I love what you said just before around giving those emotions respect, time, and understanding. And so that's a very interesting kind of trio that you named there, right? Because we don't often pause with emotions, our own or others,
Yeah.
right? And we like that respect almost feels like validation, right? We do a lot of work with trauma at Awaken. And so I think sometimes, especially as you were saying, like sometimes emotions might feel disproportionate, like out of a context, like, wow, that's a really big emotion for something that may not seem large. But when we think about trauma and we think about a trauma response, it is disproportionate to the present moment, but not to the root.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where what you named as understanding starts to be really important.
Yeah, it's work that I've had to do for myself, in my own trauma responses, um, learning how to regulate my nervous system and to regulate my emotions, has been probably the most important part of my own healing journey thus far.
Yeah, and so coming back to the role maybe of meditation and mindfulness in that self-regulation for yourself, and then the connection that that has with nurturing for yourself and for others.
Yeah, yeah. I just feel like I feel like you can't have nurturing without compassion, and having the um, patience to uh, work through those big emotions and learn how to emotionally regulate is like the most self compassionate thing that you can do. And I find when you do that, it becomes easier to extend that compassion to others. I feel like you have to, like, you almost can't have one without the other. Um, so I would say that's how those things kind of connect and intertwine. It just teaches us to be more compassionate to ourselves, and then by extension, we can be more compassionate to the people around us. And I feel like compassionate and nurturing, like they're just hand in hand. Compassion and nurturing, you can't have one without the other.
Yeah. I guess I want to ask if you have a particular practice that helps you self-regulate when you're feeling really escalated, that
Yeah.
maybe there's one that you could share or that you've used with kiddos to help
Hmm.
them self-regulate.
Oh yeah, there's a lot actually. A really simple one is putting both your hands on your chest like this. And I've even seen that with kiddos if you feel comfortable enough, like maybe just placing it right here or having them place their hand right here. Um,
So
it like,
just like at the bottom of the neck, like a
yeah,
hand, almost like hand on the heart.
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
like pulls, it's like an instant one if you find that you're like in the situation where you're hyperventilating. Um, it like pulls focus to your chest, and then it makes helping with like breathing regulation a little bit easier. Um, you can say like have your hand, feel your hand rise and fall, that type of a thing. Um, I've done the um, like look around the room, find two things that are green, find three things that are white. Um, Describe textures. Give. I have these things. They're called worry stones, and they're like the material of like a crystal, but there's like a flattened point that you can rub your thumb. I like to use those myself. I like to give them out too. Anything to kind of pull focus back into the room is really, really great for moments where you need like instant relief. Um, I would say another really good visualization is having your feet planted on the floor. You could sit somewhere, imagining a beam of light shooting from each foot down to the center of the earth. If you're sitting on the floor, you could say that it goes from your sit bones. It's just a really good grounding technique. Um, so that's a really good one. Um, yeah,
Those are all awesome. A lot of them are kind of using our senses to ground us in the present moment, in case we maybe like either touch or vision.
yeah,
And so I think that that's always for me very grounding and centering, and the feet on the floor image and that, like all of those things are really helpful for grounding. So that's wonderful. And I guess the other thing, as you were talking about compassion, that was coming into my mind that I would love to hear your opinion about is I think often we have the assumption that things like nurturing and compassion, you either have them, you are a compassionate person, you are a nurturing person, or you're not,
mhm,
right? And I feel through my practice, I've learned you can, with intentionality, grow those qualities.
absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess I would ask you, how has that worked for you? Have you had moments or either towards yourself, or maybe there was a child you remember that you were working with where you didn't immediately feel nurturing and compassionate and you were able to work with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like a moment that comes to mind is just being in an infant room on St. Patrick's Day, and the teachers had, well, everyone, it was just, we had like Irish like music playing. It was like music to do like Irish dance to, like fiddles and stuff. And there was 8 babies in the room and me and another teacher, and all the babies were crying at the same time. And you had this Irish fiddle music playing, and it was like I overstimulation to the most extreme. Um, and I just I had to take a deep breath because we were just changing poopy diaper after poopy diaper. So you add kind of that to the mix, and it's like you have to ground yourself, and you have to center yourself, and you have to have compassion for yourself in that moment, because it's like I started getting, really angry, and me and the other person, we there was moments where we were kind of snapping at each other, and we both looked at each other and realized we have to take a deep breath, we have to ground ourselves, we have to calm down, because these infants require the most compassion and attention. They can't help that they're crying. And then you find ways to, we were able to turn the music off, and that made a huge difference. And then slowly but surely you get through the situation. Um, but you have to hold that space for yourself, and you have to have compassion for yourself in moments like that. And it definitely is something that you have to work towards, especially if you've experienced trauma, because there are certain situations where you might not know that you're not being compassionate, you're not extending compassion to yourself. Um, so you haven't cultivated that yet, but you absolutely can.
I like that story because, and what you just said, because I think it names something that for me is like the definition of mindfulness, that it starts with noticing, it starts with awareness. Because sometimes we get in that mode where we are pissed off, we are feeling angry, or we are feeling overwhelmed, and that autopilot kicks in and we're just pushing through it, and our awareness isn't even there. But as soon as you have the awareness, like, oh, this isn't going the way it should go, like, I'm really not in a good space at this moment, and this music is not really helpful.
Yeah,
As soon as you can kind of name what's happening, that opens up a possibility of shifting.
absolutely.
Yeah. And then there's that moment of kind of choice, right? How do I want to respond in this moment? How do I want to show up? And I often say when I'm working with people, like, what would your best self do? What would that look like?
Wow. Yeah, that's the amazing, like, that's been the empowering element of the journey, is that, like, you can do that. Like, once you learn how to do that, you can do it, and nobody can take that away from you. Um, it's really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. And it's really hard sometimes too.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. My other job right now is in the service industry, and you absolutely have to, you know, be compassionate to yourself, and remember to be compassionate to other people, even whenever, you know, they might be grumpy. You might not feel like being compassionate that day. Um, it's really important.
It may be the case that those grumpy people need it more than the people who are pleasant to
Exactly.
interact with. That's what I often try to remind myself is like the person who is lovely and loving and grateful and all the things you want with someone that you're interacting with, like they're actually doing great.
Hmm.
But the
Yeah.
person who's really grumpy or crotchety or complaining or whatever it is, like they're actually probably the person that needs more compassion and care,
Right. Right. Exactly.
and harder to generate it for.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's the tricky part.
That is the tricky part. And then, for me, it's really like I have to remind myself, um, on a bad day, that's me,
Yes. Exactly.
right?
Yes.
I have shown up and been in spaces and with humans and not been my best self.
Absolutely. Me too.
And what would I have wanted someone else to do when I showed up that way?
Right, right. And learning not to take it personally
Yes.
is a big thing too, especially
Mm,
healing from trauma. It can be easy to take everything personally. You
it
might think
is,
you're the
yeah.
reason you made everybody angry that day, or whatever, but that's not the case.
Yeah, and I find that that's the hardest to do with those that are closest with me,
Absolutely.
right? And so, my children, my spouse, my family members, my dear ones, when they're grumpiest with me, I always take it personally. It's so hard for me to be like, pause.
Yeah.
What's going on with you? And again, on my good days, I'm able to do that. But on my bad days, when I'm feeling vulnerable, when I'm feeling not resourced myself, it's hard. It's hard not to take things personally.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the most difficult things. but it gives you the most peace of mind, you know.
Yes. Yeah, and then it also allows some space to ask a question and be curious about what's actually going on,
That's so true.
right? Because if we immediately take something personally, it kind of puts us on the defense. At least
Yeah.
that's how I experience it. Like,
Oh yeah.
why are they attacking me, right? Why is this coming at me? Why are they saying this about me or whatever, right? But if it's, that tone of voice sounds like they're struggling or angry or, fill in the blank, whatever it is. I wonder what that's about
Yeah. Yeah.
if you haven't already decided what it's about.
Right. Right. If you haven't, just been overthinking it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious, just having said that, if you have any thoughts, and especially with working with kids, that you could share around the relationship between nurturing and boundary setting.
Oh yeah. Um, I think that's a really important thing to learn how to do. Um, and it takes a level of self love and self respect um, that you have. At least I had to learn how to do that. I wasn't a person that was very good at setting boundaries at all. I wanted to please everyone, um, and I'm still working on that. But you know, it's so important because you can't show up for other people if you've burnt yourself out because you didn't set boundaries. So it takes a level of introspection where you have to understand what your needs really are. Like, do I need my cat again? Do I need exceptional amounts of rest right now because I'm not feeling well and I can't show up. I wouldn't be responsible for me to show up right now or you know yeah, it takes a level of like self compassion, self understanding, checking in with yourself, and then being okay with potentially disappointing somebody, which is the thing that's really hard.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there when you're setting boundaries to protect your own health and well-being, like first starting again with that awareness of your own needs
Mm.
and your own limitations, right? And yeah, leaning into that self-care and that self-nurturing, right? And it's so hard to do sometimes, right? Like you said, you don't want to disappoint other folks.
Hmm. And it's especially important to do with kids because we're modeling that behavior for them to be able to do. Um, and a lot of times with young children, um, you have to establish a lot of physical boundaries. Um, they want to be held and they want to hug you and always be on your body. And first of all, it's important to teach them to establish those physical boundaries so that they understand that they need to do that with other people. And then it also can be incredibly overstimulating to be in a situation where you're looking after a lot of kids and your body's being grabbed and moved around. It's a lot. So that's I would say an important element of that applies specifically to working with kids. Modeling that behavior um, and teaching boundaries is really important.
Yeah, it's like I'm just hearing you talk like, yes, that's so important. And that touch is so important, right?
Mhm.
And and
Absolutely.
they need that so much, and they need to know that sometimes we get to say no. Like, so
Yes,
it's like both
find
and.
the
I
balance.
remember when I was in high school, it just brought back when you were describing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've experienced that. When I
Mhm.
was in high school, I volunteered in Mexico. I lived in Arizona, so it wasn't really far from the border. I volunteered in Mexico at an orphanage.
Oh wow.
And my job at the orphanage, I was in the toddler room.
Mhm.
I don't even remember how many toddlers were in this room, maybe 25 or 30. Like it was a lot of little ones.
Mhm.
My job was just to go sit in the room and hug the kids.
That's beautiful.
because they weren't getting enough
They needed
physical
it.
attention. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I had this little kids coming and hugging and, and it was so important that they have that physical touch. But I also remember like it was very draining.
Yeah, I can
A, a
imagine.
few hours of being with high needs kiddos and trying to fill
Mhm.
that gap and nurture them, like it can be draining. And that kind of swings back to what you were saying before, that in order to be able to be present and do that work, you really have to find a way to refill and recharge
Yeah,
yourself.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The touch element is absolutely so important. Um, but yeah, yeah, everything you said, yes.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, so I think we've hit, like, I guess just what's coming to my mind as we've been talking is we've hit like all these different levels of nurturing, like the physical nurturing, the emotional elements of nurturing, the the idea that we have practices that kind of nourish our mind and soul, and the journaling that you talked about also feels so nurturing in the sense of emotional regulation and processing as nurturing, right? So just all these different beautiful nuggets for people to think about as they listen to this and explore their own kind of self-care routine and the role that their own nurturing might have in their life. And I'm curious if there is a resource that you have been using to support you on this journey, either in your mindfulness practice or your nurturing journey.
I would say read poetry. Um, I really love Sufi poetry. Hafiz and Rumi are two of my absolute favorite poets. And it just provides an opportunity to be really introspective, really think deeply. And it's a great way, I feel like reading is an amazing mindfulness practice, but sometimes it's hard to give our full attention to, it was hard for me to read for a while. I read all the time, but it took establishing a regular practice of reading. So having short poems that are really meaningful and dense in their meaning, um, I think is a great way to get yourself in a healthy mindset and to establish a mindfulness practice.
I love that. I love poetry too. And both of those poets are up on my list of wonderful. And I wonder if you have a favorite poem that maybe we could like find and post, or you could read it to us if you have it handy.
Grab one just in case.
Yeah, that's
This
great.
this entire book, it's called The Gift. It like has gotten me through just some of like the most painful times of my life. And I tried to find one that was related to mindfulness meditation. And there's this poem. It's called Curfews. It's very short, and it says, "Curfews. Noise is a cruel ruler, who is always imposing curfews. While stillness and quiet break open the vintage bottles, awake the real band." I
Love it.
just I love that so much. I love that, like, such a short poem, such a small amount of words contains so much meaning.
Yeah. And that was Hafiz?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Awesome. Well, there is a practice of contemplation, which is a mindfulness practice where you sit, kind of center yourself, settle your mind, read something, kind of explore the words themselves and the meanings that they give, and sit with that. And then after a while of just contemplating the actual words and meaning, you let those go and you sit with what's coming up with you around whatever you just read. You
Yes.
just sit with the emotion, the texture, whatever, wherever your mind's taking you, and then you try to let all that go and come back to center and just see what the residue is that's there. So I love that as a practice, a contemplation practice. So anyone out there, if you want to Google some Hafiz or Rumi or use that poem that was just read, that's a great practice. Is there anything else, Summerly, that I haven't asked you about nurturing or just something you find important in your practice or healing journey that you would love to share?
Um, I would say just to remind people to be patient with themselves, um, and have faith that healing can happen. We are capable of healing.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. It was great.
Say Something Studios.